Welcome to the Mapper Forward podcast, everyone. This is Lisa Farr, and today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Elixir Specialty Coffee. Looks like whiskey, feels like tea, made from coffee, and unlike anything you've ever tasted before, Elixir is a ready-to-go bottled beverage that tastes very different to anything that you've had before. Today on the podcast, I am joined by the very esteemed Phyllis Johnson. Phyllis, thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm very excited about this. I struggle to get women on the podcast, first of all. So cheers to you for saying yes.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
And the other thing is I struggle to find women who are not white to come on the podcast. So I know I'm white as a ghost, but I'm actually not white by American standards because I am Arab.
Okay.
And I've been wanting to have the kinds of conversations that we're going to have today for quite some time. And
Great.
The fact that I get to have these conversations with you is very exciting for me. And so, why don't you tell, I've read up a lot about you. I'm kind of a fangirl, just quietly. And the reason I say that is because you've walked a path that I could only dream of having with regards to the things that you've done in our industry. It's women like me who stand on the very strong shoulders of women like you. I wouldn't have the opportunities that I have if it wasn't for women like you. And I take that very seriously. I'm very grateful. And I should hope to model my shoulders off the shoulders of women like you. So I'm so grateful to have you here.
Well, I'm more than honored to be here and to have this conversation. And I have to be honest, I don't feel as though I should receive so much credit because for me it has been a very long and interesting journey, but it's just been get the work done, and I haven't really taken a lot of time to think about, being an inspiration. But I can say that when I first started in coffee, the first thing I didn't know a lot about coffee, and I picked up the SCA guidebook directory, and I saw a picture of Erna Knudsen, and there she was with a big smile, and I said, if she can do it, I can do it. And she's going to need someone to replace her one day. I don't think I ever lived up to the real role model that she was. But it inspired me. So for that, I do understand what you're saying as far as just having representation there to say that it's okay. You can do this.
Yeah.
So.
It's one of those things that I think that when we look at it, we're not necessarily considering the role that we're playing for the 20-year from now version of us. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's
yes.
It's one of those things where we look at it and think, well, I'm just so focused on what I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm. I'm focused what I can contribute right now. I wonder, did you get to ever have the luxury of projecting what it might look like into the future of your career? How long have you been in the industry now?
Well, I've been in coffee June 1999, so this June marked 20 years. It's really funny because I'm actually starting to see some of the things that I envisioned when I first started. I had a career before I came to coffee. I studied microbiology, and so I spent years as a researcher and then working in the business of science. But I always knew I wanted to own my own company, and my husband and I sought to do that when we had the first chance. So coffee wasn't something I knew a lot about. But I can say, when I look back, I remember thinking when I was traveling in Rwanda back in 2003, looking at their specialty, fully washed coffee for the first time, and making a heart decision, not an economic sound decision, but a heart decision to say, yeah, I'm going to buy this coffee. I can remember vividly thinking, when I'm really, really old, wouldn't it be great if someone brought me a cup of Rwanda coffee? And at that time, Rwanda coffee was not very common in the US whatsoever. As a matter of fact, when I went out to try to sell Rwanda coffee, people would say, retailers would say, well, you know what happened there, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable even having that country's name on my menu board. And so it's amazing how, you know, we lived in Cambridge and there was a Bourbon Rwanda shop right down the street. It happened a lot sooner than I thought. Rwanda coffee became such a common product, but I can remember thinking to myself, if I do this, maybe I will have helped in some way usher this new way of this new opportunity for farmers in Rwanda. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of things come to pass, which is pretty cool.
How does that make you feel?
You know, it makes me feel good because you finally realize that a lot of the things that you thought about in your head and things that really didn't even come to the forefront of your thoughts, you realize that they were valid. You know,
Oh, I'm laughing just because I have so many of those thoughts myself. I wonder if this is valid. I wonder if I'm overthinking this. I wonder if
yeah, what am I doing?
yeah. Does anybody care?
Yeah, I know, I know.
Is it really going to make a difference?
Oh gosh, you know, I have to admit, and I'm sure you can attest to this, in those moments where I've had over the past 20 years, in those moments when I've had those times when I was at the height of not seeing my way and saying, what is this? What am I doing? There was just this one opportunity that flew in, or one confirmation.
At the perfect time.
Yeah.
Like just when you needed it, someone will send you an email and say, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Yeah. Because I think we're too
Yeah.
close to it to see the impact that it has on the people around us. I can remember thinking, sitting down with my accountant early on, and she was saying, she wasn't used to working with coffee import companies. And she was like, your profit margins are so thin. And then I remember, being on a trip to Kenya and just standing there thinking, what I am trying to do has very little
Impact.
Well, the whole story isn't in the profit and loss statement.
No.
And so,
oh, wow. I like that. Sorry, I cut you off there.
Oh, that's okay. I had to understand that for myself, even if I could never explain it to her, who was a beautiful woman who, was great in what she did. She had never traveled the world. She never gained the opportunity to see what I saw. So for her to say your profit margins are thin was true, but it was for me to decide if that was okay and if I sought profitability in other ways and other things that I could do.
It's funny you say that. Geez, this conversation feels like it's speaking to very many levels of me. I wrote a blog post yesterday on approaching the next decade in coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're a business owner or a coffee professional. And my accountant had a life-changing conversation with me when I was in business the first year here in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, so how much money do you want to make next year? And I said to her, what are you talking about? And she said, how much money do you want to make next year? I said, why are you asking me that question? she said, well, we have to figure out what the goal is for the business next year. And I was thinking to myself, as though it's that easy. Like you just pick a number out of the sky and that's going to be the goal for next year. And I realized that it was the wrong question. I was also, for some context, it was the presidential race. Trump had just won. And I was feeling very out of sorts. I was financially stressed. I was emotionally stressed. I was not in a good place with myself at the time. I'd moved over here much quicker than I wanted to, over to the US, and felt a bit discombobulated. And so when she said that question to me, I thought, she's asking me this question to get me to think about what, she doesn't realize this, but the magic of the universe and the way that it works, I guess, or this simulation that we're in, or whatever it is trying to get me to figure out what the right question is. And the right question is, what would make you feel wealthy this time next year? And the answer came so immediately, it shocked me. And the answer was peace of mind.
Yeah.
Peace of mind would have made me feel incredibly wealthy at that moment. And I think that's the wealth I've been seeking my whole life.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment that was a life currency that I could build wealth in or lose. So it was something that I could use resources to buy more of or to spend. And I thought, well, if that's a life currency, what other life currencies are important to me? And can I actually make them a part of my business?
Wow.
And so I did. I ended up identifying 7 life currencies
Wow.
that we now assign KPIs to. They have financial numbers attached to them. They have other worth numbers attached to them. And we now teach it through Map It Forward.
That's excellent.
And I came to realize, just like you're saying, that you knew that going to Kenya, there was other value in it other than monetary value. There are life currencies that you get paid with, that your employees get paid with, that your customers get paid with, that aren't necessarily financial.
Right.
What I came to realize was the financial element of it was a resource rather than a currency. It was a mechanism to build wealth in these currencies that are much more fun and fulfilling to build wealth in. Because
Exactly.
you can expand them into other parts of your life. And it sounds like that was what you were experiencing when you were going to Kenya and asking that question.
Yeah, coming to coffee 20 years ago, I had figured out that just making a lot of money wasn't what was going to make me happy. I grew up poor. I grew up in rural Arkansas on a farm. When I was growing up, I would chop cotton. My family and I went out and chopped cotton. So we were the equivalent to coffee pickers, which is always so interesting to me when I'm asked to speak at certain conferences. And I'm thinking, they don't know who I am. I'm the worker. I'm not even the farmer. I was a part of the worker team.
Yeah.
It was just cotton, not coffee in the U.S. So my mother, I come from a big family, 5 sisters, 2 brothers. There were 8 of us. My mother had a 6th grade education. So the most important thing to her was that we get an education. And so she pushed and pushed, and I think mostly all of my sisters and brothers have an education and have careers. And after I became, got my degree in microbiology, was married, working hard, I realized that I was living a dream. I was living I was doing what I thought I always wanted to do. I had achieved the dreams of my mother, and but I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy at all. And when I thought about happiness, I thought about chopping cotton in the sun with my family. I thought about being
Wow.
with my family, not necessarily doing the hard labor. Um, so when coffee came to me, there were some elements about that I knew enriched my life that I needed to get back to. Um, because just working in a corporate environment was very cold, and that I need another pair of shoes, that I need to
Right.
buy, at some point, enough is truly enough.
It really is.
And so having the opportunity to engage with coffee gave me something that I had no idea would take me back to a space in my life where it was the most I had the most richness of life. And it was, farm life, being with people, understanding that just because you may not be educated, it doesn't mean that you don't understand. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean that you can't do some incredible things, because, I saw many people like that in my community. And my mother was that person. As I said, she had a sixth grade education, and she was bold, and she was a deep thinker, and she did things that you know, many even men in our community back in Arkansas were afraid or apprehensive about doing. So, so coffee has really given me from the start that extra something that my soul needed. And I think it's that way for a lot of people in coffee.
It sounds like connectedness is one of your life currencies.
Yes, for sure. For sure.
I feel that people who grow up in a culture that is community focused, as opposed to a culture that is individualistic. I feel that the American culture is very individualistic. The Australian culture is very individualistic. The Arab culture for me is all about community. And I have noticed this year that that's what I miss. Having stepped into a very individualistic culture, it's almost like I don't have the words for it yet. But it is something that you definitely feel if you come from a community-based culture and you're removed from whatever your community is, and then you step into something where you are left to fend for yourself. You become hyper aware of like missing limbs. Does that make sense? And I often look at photos of like of in Kenya and in Ethiopia when the women are processing coffee together. It reminds me a lot of when my grandmother would tell me how when they're baking in the village in Syria,
Right.
how all the women come together
Yeah.
for a feast day. Let's say it's St. Elias Day. When they're making the cookies or the desserts, the baked goods for the whole village, and how they all come together and they do that. I was born in Australia, but my family come from a farming village. And so when they all come together and they all farm together, it's such a community cultivated awareness.
Right.
And the corporate structure, the American structure, none of it is supportive of that. None of it is encouraging of that.
Yeah, it can be very lonely. And at the time when I was going through it, 25 years old and in the corporate world, being a Black woman, I was dealing with so much. And as I look back, I can start to make some sense of it. But I just know that it wasn't going to be for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. But I was really picking up on a lot of things that it wasn't going to make for a happy life for myself. And so I knew that I needed to exit from day one. I I think I had this folder in my desk called the P Company. And I knew that I would keep
It's awesome.
thinking of ideas and doing something until the right opportunity came along. And, thank goodness it was coffee. So I'm glad to
How
be
how
here.
did you find the opportunity? How did it show up?
Well, I was first excited about. I always paid attention to the things that I got excited about, and I
Uh-huh.
was excited about storytelling. I love stories. I love hearing people's stories. And I also enjoyed learning about Africa. Africa, it seemed that almost everything that I would pick up or touch in a shop or had a story behind it, and it just kind of drew me to Africa. Being African American also had a lot to do with it. And I would find myself in my work traveling around and visiting different little shops and places that carried different African things. And I was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I was traveling there for my scientific job. And I was in this guy's shop downtown. And I was looking around. I was like, I got to do something. I don't know what it is. I got to do something. I'm not going to be able to sell enough soapstone to make a living, soapstone curios and stuff like this. So he said, I got some coffee. I want to show you some coffee. And it was in his basement. And so he took me downstairs in the store, and there was this big bag of green coffee. It said Kenya AA. And he said, they grow coffee in my country. And it was almost like the light bulb went off. It was almost like, I had this experience where immediately when he said it, I started thinking of things like underrepresented, exploited. I don't know why all these things came to my mind about coffee. It was a commodity. It was the first time I knew coffee grew in Kenya, right?
Yep.
Um, and here he is talking about the best coffee. And I think I had visited a couple coffee shops, and I had never seen Africa or Black people in any way directly connected to coffee at a deep level. Maybe drinking a little bit in the
Wow.
house, but I just knew when those words came out of his mouth that there's a lot to this. And not knowing absolutely nothing about it, I knew that there was, and maybe it's just growing up, as a Black person in America, you know that there's always something deeper that's not on the surface that you have to dig for. And it was a couple years later in my first trip to Kenya when I remember being on the mountainside of, I think it was in Kirinyaga, in the Kirinyaga region at a washing station. And it was all these women and all these men, and they were totally separated from each other. And when they asked me to speak, and I spoke, I wasn't prepared in any way to speak because I thought I was just going to visit one of the washing station, one of the cooperatives where we had bought coffee from. Well, they were talking about this was the paid, highest lot ever sold, and they had ever sold their coffee for. And I thought, oh my gosh, you mean my small little startup company was the highest buyer that they had ever seen for their coffee? And and then the women just kind of approached me, and I remember I have this one photo my husband captured where this one lady kisses me, and the other lady is looking at her in shock, and they embraced me like, we've been kind of looking for you,
Yeah.
where have
Wow.
you
What a
been?
profound moment.
So it was in that moment that I thought back to being downstairs in that store in Minneapolis, that had been revealed to me, that it was much deeper than I ever knew, and that I was on a journey to try to figure out how deep it really, really is. And I continue to learn and to grow and to see how deep it is. Yeah.
How big is the disconnect between the two ends of the supply chain, do you think? Is it still as big as it used to be? Is it getting better? Have we made fractional progress?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I think part of the disconnect is by choice.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think it is designed to be that way.
When you
Um,
say that, do you mean choice or ignorance?
choice.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's not it's not it's not ignorance. Is choice. Even though I think that we may not believe that we're making that choice, but that choice has been made. I mean, I've I've had the opportunity to work with people who work for very large companies and people who work for really small startup companies like my own. And the level in which you want to understand what is going on, it tends to rest in those who want to know, who are closer connected to it, um, who and oftentimes they have fewer resources to do anything about to help solve the problem. Because you would think if I'm CEO of ABC company and we do $1 billion in coffee sales a year or whatever, that there's great opportunity and impact that I could have. But in some ways, I think that at that level, there's just not, there are, I mean, the system allows you to be far removed from reality. And sometimes it just works better that way for some people. But I think it is by choice to a certain degree. It's not ignorance.
Something that you're saying there is resonating with a thought that I've been having recently. Our focus is determined by one question, I think, and I haven't finished the thought processing of this yet. This might be a good place to do it. The question is, who am I of service to? So if I am of service to my customers versus if I am of service to my shareholders.
Yeah, that is the
Now,
question.
if I am of service to my shareholders, I give zero fucks about the supply chain unless it's going to serve me, because I then have to be of service to the shareholders.
Right.
If I am of service to my customers, I'm going to be beholden to bringing them the best quality experience that they can have. But once I expand my scope to I am of service to myself and my values, in a strange way, by coming into the self, you're expanding your whole scope, because you then have to define what your values are and then apply those through the whole supply chain. And like I said, I haven't finished the pondering process of the whole thing, but it's something that I've been trying to understand as I look towards what my next decade in coffee is going to look like.
I think that's a really smart way to think about it, because I've seen where, as an importer, you kind of sit between two worlds. And of course, you want to have the best relationships with the companies that you're selling to, and you want to have the best relationships with the companies that you're buying from and the producers on the ground. But you always have to kind of center yourself and say, use your power. I remember a situation where I was negotiating a price for some coffee with a large size roaster. And I remember saying to the buyer, I've seen people cut the grass at the washing station by hand. The labor is so intense. No, I cannot sell it at that level. Um, so I think as someone who sits wherever you sit, you really have to understand the power that you have. And sometimes your voice is the voice of what you've experienced, what you've seen, and how that weighs on you, and what you can do about that. Instead of just giving in or saying this is the way that it should be, or I'm just going to keep my customers happy, and because not everyone will be your customer. Not everyone. I've found that when there are relationships that are aligned, those are the best relationships. There's less, really hard work in those situations because you understand the goal, the overall goal.
I noticed that from my own career that so it's coming on 18 years in coffee.
Wow.
And I've only worked in specialty.
Mm-hmm.
I've not worked in any other. I caught the wave at the right time. I left corporate. You and I have a ridiculously similar path. I did a degree in genetics. I then went into corporate, and I then went into coffee. So you and I have had pretty much the same path, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And it's not until I had this podcast that I have become aware of how big a gap that I wasn't aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So I would consider myself very well informed about this end of the supply chain, my end of the supply chain, and little to no understanding before I started this podcast of the back end of the supply chain and the middle of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't from a lack of anything really other than the time that I could have been spending learning about the supply chain, I was investing into my music career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
And now that I look back at it, I realize how much better a coffee professional I could have been in being of service to my customers and to my employer had I have not had this massive hole, this gaping hole in my knowledge base.
Wow.
And it's why I'm so passionate about inviting in people who work at the front end of the supply chain to get themselves schooled on understanding the connection between the front end of the supply chain with the middle and the back end of the supply chain. Because you remove either of those two gaping holes and remove them from the equation, you don't have a business or a career. That's how fundamental it is.
Yeah.
And I think that given that the barrier to entry is so low for people at the front end of the supply chain, that they live with this idea of the imposter syndrome. Someone's going to figure out that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Okay.
And they're so busy keeping that up, whether they're owning a business, and employees and employers have confessed this to me, that they're so busy keeping up that facade that what they're not doing is realizing hey, listen, you're here, we want you, stay. But we need more people that understand the whole thing and that can figure out how to make the whole thing work rather than just this part at the front.
Exactly. 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I received an opportunity to join the National Coffee Association. And I had served on the board for the Specialty Coffee Association, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that. They had invited me to strategic planning, and I thought, like most people who are in specialty, when they think about the National Coffee Association, they think big companies, commercial coffee, let's stay away from those guys. But I was talking with my mentor, and she said, this is a perfect opportunity for you because you really get to learn some things that you haven't ever even thought about. And that's
like what?
Well, you get to learn about coffee outside of specialty. You get to learn about coffee on a much bigger scale. Um, I learned about coffee and all the attacks that come against coffee from, from from people trying to say that it causes different issues, and just being a part of an organization that tries to look at it from a broader scale and how it impacts the U.S. coffee consumer. When you're in specialty, and I started out in specialty, and I've always, purchased specialty coffees, provided specialty coffees. But the opportunity to see coffee from a broader scale, it just gives you better tools to understand what you're up against, what the challenges are. Um, and I don't know, it's just, you can't solve a problem without fully understanding it or seeing the whole breadth of it. And I
Right.
think that for me, spending 6 years not totally focused on specialty, sitting in a room with people just like me, rabid about whatever idea or passion they have about coffee, um, but being around very seasoned executives where there are different types of discussions. For me, that was it was a great experience, and I'm very grateful that I had that experience. I'm probably the only person that has had the chance to serve on both boards, a part of specialty and the National Coffee Association. And there's great value in both. They both have their struggles, but there's value. There's challenges. So yeah, you can't pose a solution without understanding, what you're up against. And
I've got to
yeah.
ask, what that this is something that I hear a lot of people say again and again and again. They say this to me directly in conversation when they talk about these kinds of boards, and they're very frustrated
Mm-hmm.
at the fact that they feel that they're not achieving enough. What are the kinds of things that stop those organizations from achieving the kind of, big ticket things that they should be fixing?
Well, I think that I think that we put a lot of hope in people and organizations sometimes when we don't fully understand the mandate of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I spent some years working or serving on the board for the International Women's Coffee Alliance, and we were able to accomplish a lot. Struggled as well as most organizations do. Um, but I think that you have to figure out, we have to stop assigning the problems to those we think should fix the problem. Um, we should see ourselves as someone who can help solve problems, and then understand in what capacity can I help to solve this problem. And sometimes it can be as simple as building awareness, having a podcast, talking about issues. Um, but I do believe we put a lot of weight on associations when in all honesty, a lot of organizations that I've had the chance to be a part of and also view from the outside, they're focused on the existence of themselves, you know.
Okay.
And that's not a bad thing. We all need to survive, but it's to go and solve that other big problem that's lingering out there. There's so many steps away from that, that we just don't realize how far away. And if they saw themselves as being able to solve those problems, I guess. Do they actually see themselves as the solvers of those problems? Because oftentimes they may not. So, you
And
really
it
have to
goes,
look at the problem, because the problem, as you call it a problem, may not necessarily be a problem for everyone. It might be a problem, but it may not be the problem that affects my life in a negative way.
right. And I guess, again, it goes back to who are we of service to? Are
Right.
we of service to the people who are a part of our organization?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we a part of the people who contribute the most money to keep the organization funded?
Right.
Or are we of service to coffee?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that we actually have an organization that is of service to coffee.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be pretty hard to do that in a place where you don't, of service to coffee. Yeah, that's pretty deep. That's pretty deep.
And I'm not saying that in a way of, oh, coffee is this holy grail, etc., etc. Remove the kind of, if you're to remove the insinuation of like the woo-woo that comes with that statement of we're of service to coffee. Without this, we don't have an industry. Remove it, and we all have to find something else to work in.
Mm-hmm.
Yet none of us are actually of service to the survival of coffee. It's just something I've been kicking around in my head. This idea that we all seem to be of service to different things.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that seems to be the thread of all of it, excuse me, is this commodity that enables all of our financial and professional and business existence.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how we, or if we, can find a way to have a way of being of service to coffee. I know that sounds crazy. Like this is the first time I'm hearing it outside of my head.
No, that's fine.
But it does make sense.
It
That's
does.
the weird part about it, is that like we seem to be of service to all of this shit around coffee. But if you remove the coffee, none of us are here. Or none of us are doing what we're currently doing.
Yeah. I think that you could probably insert coffee. You could change coffee and insert other things there. Coffee is really just a vehicle that's riding,
Right.
that we're all riding in through this walkway of life, I think. Yeah. Very interesting.
Same thing with regards to corn. Same thing with regards to avocados. Same thing with regards to grain, like all of it. We are an extension of this complex agricultural product, and it facilitates us being able to live these very interesting lives doing what we're doing.
Right.
Remove the element of money from it. Like, I am somebody who is deeply satisfied with the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's because of coffee.
Right. Exactly.
So it brings me back to this kind of question, like, who am I of service to? And I don't have the answers to that. It's just a thing I'm kicking around, and I didn't even think I'd talk to you about it today.
Wow.
But I'm really fucking glad I did.
I'm glad you did too. Yeah, that's actually one of the things I jotted down from our conversation is who are we of service to?
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
And it's deep. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm not a shallow thinker, as you may have guessed, but neither are you. And you think deeply and you feel deeply, and the intention that you bring to your career and the things that you're doing and your company is so beautifully refreshing, because
Thank
it's
you.
not just something that you say, it's what you do as well. Like, it's clear that it's what you're doing. You go to Origin. I haven't even been to Origin yet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what does that really say about me and what I'm doing?
Well, I don't think it says something bad about you. Um,
No, it says something
um,
incomplete. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that needs to happen at some time in the next couple of years.
yeah, if you want it to happen. I remember living in a neighborhood in Boise, Idaho, where the guy, couple doors down, drove a truck that with the coffee company, Pete's Coffee and Tea, and so one day we had a little neighborhood party, and I said, "Hey, you're the guy that delivers coffee to the local grocery stores from Pete's. I've seen your van." He was like, "Yeah, I've been in coffee like 30 years."
What?
And so we're just
In
laughing and
Boise.
talking. And yeah, in Boise. And so he was just such a friendly guy. He had never seen a coffee bean that wasn't roasted. And to me, that was shocking. I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "Coffee?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I
Phyllis, I'll
just,
shock you even further. Most people don't know that coffee comes from a tree.
yeah, yeah. So that's when I started to think, wow, okay. So it's a huge industry, and it can be very disconnected. It can be very disconnected, but there's value in the disconnection if you really think about it. Um, when I first started working with women in coffee, I did not necessarily think about the liberation of Phyllis Johnson and women like me who want to have a career or build a business in coffee. I thought about working with women in producing countries, women who have fewer rights, women who are overlooked, those who do the coffee picking and all the things you've heard about women in coffee, right? But I think that the current generation is like it's about me. It's about me as a woman in this industry.
Right.
And I need space. I need understanding. I need, all these are my needs basically. Whereas when I started and starting where I did in the industry, um, it did not make me think about bringing the focus on to me. Um, Sometimes I think it's best if we fight our battles from afar versus fighting them up front, like as you being the subject of that battle. But you can, I think there's research that shows that women are better negotiators if they're representing other women than if they are negotiating on their own personal behalf. And so it was kind of like that for me and many women that were in the fight of trying to, bring women's empowerment to the forefront and kind of working in a vacuum for many, many years until it became, a global conversation. So then you do have the women who are working, at cafes and doing different things, such as yourself, are are now talking about this movement and this need to have space and be a part of the conversation. But I will say, starting as a coffee importer 20 years ago, being a Black woman, no one really thought that I would make it. Even, well, I kind of knew I would, but I kind of hoped I
Yeah,
would.
you did.
I always said I passed organic chemistry and I chop cotton. I can pretty much do anything. Um,
You've also had children, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
There you go.
I remember, and there's beauty in that. There's opportunity in that when people discount you. You have to, you have to think about that. That it's called flying under the radar. No one will think that you would pose a threat to their business or take away a customer, or because who are you? I remember I was working with a roaster And I mean, you deal with a lot of other crap, you know. I was working with the roaster, and he said to me, it was our first time working together, and, you know, he wanted the coffee from the country we were working in. And so it would not have been a relationship otherwise. But I remember he sent me this long email, and he says, "Do you even have the money to buy the coffee?" I mean, it just
I
got to a
read this. This
level.
was this article in the SCA wrote about you, right? You
Yeah.
told this story.
And I remember I remember it. I remember getting the email on a Friday or a Thursday. And I can remember just being in a state of shock until like the following Monday before I could just like pull myself together, because I felt as though there was so much in that.
The
Uh,
mansplaining is just hilarious.
yeah. You know, here he is probably thinking, what bank is going to lend money to this black woman to run a coffee import company? Come on. You know, that's probably what he was thinking. And basically, that's what he was saying in the email to me. And, you know, coming to all those harsh realities that, you know, and people will say, well, Phyllis, you're just, you know, you work hard, you know, there's no reason why, you know, you're not successful. And I'm saying, but why am I the only one? And they'll say, but you're the only one because you work hard, because you're smart. No one's ever given you anything. We don't just hand out things to people. But then I say, but who are you? What have you done? And oftentimes their credentials don't match up to a whole lot. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's kind of like saying, if I'm sitting with the smartest of the smartest person like you, and I'm impressed with what you've been able to achieve, there's something going on that doesn't allow others like you to be where you are. There's some oppression going on. There's some not thinking about the situation, overlooking the situation, holding people back, and not um, allowing the same ways of thinking towards individuals that I think that we have to seriously think about and deal with. So um, instead of just saying, you know, you're just so great, it's just you. It's
Do
not
you
me.
find it condescending?
Um, I'll admit, when I was 25 years old and I heard people talk about how incredibly smart I was and how I just wasn't like any other black person they knew. And it was
Oh,
because
fuck
I was the
that.
only black person they knew. And I'm like, I have friends who are, you know, all these things. You just
Wow.
don't know them. But for some reason, we don't say that it's us that might have the problem. We think that it's them. But and so I wasn't smart enough to say to the people that I was around, I'm not the smartest black person that ever walked the earth. Far from it. As a matter of fact, um, it's much more common than you would think. It's
Right.
just that you've chosen not to hire any. It's the fact that you've chosen that me and the CEO of this company are the only two with college degrees, but all of y'all in here right now with me don't have that, but you're here. And so I think that that's just something that's one of those things that where you have to just sit back and think a little bit deeper about, you know?
Help me with something. There's a term that I only learnt when I moved to America about 4 years ago around this subject. And it's the term people of color.
Mm-hmm.
I find it, I'm weirdly offended by it. And I'm not offended I'm more offended that people use it
Mm-hmm.
than I am that it exists, because it really suggests a form of segregation.
Okay.
Um, me being an ethnic person myself,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same as the word ethnic. It's a to separate them out. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's almost as though people who aren't of color need to have a separation between them and us?
Yeah. You know, I remember the word kind of coming out and not quite knowing when and where to use it, and, you know, just feeling a little weird about it. And I think that, you may have a lot of listeners out there where they're like, I don't want to offend anyone, so I just don't call anyone anything because I'm afraid of sounding, racist or whatever. And I think that that's kind of difficult, right? I think that you have to understand. I mean, I would think that you would not do something that is blatantly, you wouldn't say something blatantly racist or inappropriate or whatever. But for someone who's genuinely trying to learn, I'm always open to that. I just am, because I think that it's hard for people who are not of color to deal with some of it, because it is really deep. It is really deep. For me, I've always been a proud Black woman, and for some people, they may be offended that I identify myself as a proud Black woman or a Black woman, but that's who I am. I'm proud of that. I'm not proud of that in a way that belittles you. I'm proud of that because I'm proud of that.
It's your identity.
Right.
It's not your only identity, but it's a part of your identity.
It's a part of my identity.
You're an intelligent woman. You're a human. You're a compassionate person. Like, none of this compassion or intelligence or anything is tied to your Blackness.
Yeah.
It's a part of who you are, but your Blackness is a part of who you are. My Arabness is a part of who I am. I was born in Australia. I'm fake white. No one believes me when I'm saying that I'm Arab. But when I start talking Arabic, I've been there a number of times. I am deeply formed by my Arab culture. And I identify as an Australian-born Arab woman. I have been noticing in our industry particularly that there are a lot of movements and groups forming around promoting people of color. And I'm a huge advocate, especially when it comes to leadership, that if you would like to have a well-functioning team that is going to have the best chance at success, it needs to include diversity. And the reason it needs to include diversity is because you will get a greater scope of different problem-solving perspectives. You will have a more rich pool of ideas to draw from. And if your team isn't reflective of the wider community that you are of service to, you're going to be missing sales opportunities and gaps of how to be of service.
Exactly.
So for me, I look at it from a very real business kind of way that tries to remove the stigma of the virtue signaling that goes on with regards to making sure that we have this term, people of color, like opportunities for people of color based on fairness. And I think that we should aspire to deserve the positions that we hold, no matter what fucking color we are. You're a woman who has studied very hard. You have worked very hard working in cotton, in an agricultural product. You have studied very hard to be a well-rounded intellectual. You have started a business. You've done the hard shit. You don't deserve the position that you have because you are a Black woman. You deserve the position that you have because you've done the fucking work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in a situation where people have come in and they said, "Oh, are you a part of staff or do you work here?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm on the board just like you."
Yeah. Or you'll go to an event and someone will say, I read that this happened to you as well. They'll ask you who's your husband.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where's your husband? I thought you were just somebody's wife.
Yep.
Okay. I
Yep.
mean, wives, they have, we have a big role. I'm not saying there's any shame in being someone's wife, but wow, okay.
Well,
You
the
never
other
thought I was the business owner, okay?
no, the other one is the one that I get a lot of is, if Elixir was run by a man, the industry would be much more accepting of it.
Mm.
And that's a hard one to get over for me. Not because I'm not a man, but
Mm-hmm.
because that the reason that the industry has rejected the product, not because of the product, but because of me.
Mm. Wow.
And not even because of me, because I have a pair of tits. Because it's not because of my brain. I've clearly shown that I'm an intelligent woman. It's got nothing to do with my brain. It's because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
That's a really hard pill to swallow. And I've heard it again and again and again in many countries around the world, as though men, are giving me this advice to help me.
Yeah, I've had advice like that as well, several times. And that is, if you were to hire a white man on your team to sell or to be in that role, you would go further. I've heard that. Um, yeah, and there's nothing, you can't change who you are. You cannot,
No.
you know, be a woman. You want to be a woman. You are a woman.
I love being a woman.
Yeah. Um, to think that there's something you can't achieve. But I kind of look at it, I look at it a different way, in that, yeah, maybe that is the case. Maybe if you were, Leroy instead of Lee, who owned Elixir, you would go further. You would have, hundreds of millions of dollars in your account. But I kind of look at it like this. There's an African proverb that says, "Alone I can go fast, but together we can go far." And I think about some men who may have started coffee import companies around the same time that I did. And I think about my company. And I think that, maybe I'm not as far along as they are. Maybe I don't have the success that they've had. Maybe I haven't gotten the foundational grants to do gender equity work. Maybe all of this hasn't happened to Phyllis Johnson. But then when I think about what really feeds my heart and soul, I'm happy. I,
That's awesome.
and I can't ask for anything more. As I sit here and I look around my office and I see, you know, things from all my travels and the people that I've had the chance to meet and touch, and those who were just inspired, um, just inspired to keep going. And it's that has value on it. And maybe if I had been focused in a way to be, running alongside other businesses that have gotten much further than mine, maybe I would have missed some of this. And I would not have wanted to miss some of what I've gotten out of owning this company and doing business in the way that I've done it. So while there is a burden, there's also a huge blessing. And for that,
Yeah,
I
there
wouldn't
is.
trade. I just would not trade. I wouldn't trade the idea that, you know, I might decide to take time to think about how to make a change in a situation that I can't even figure out how I'm going to get paid in that situation.
Yeah.
But because I want to do it, because my heart is leading me to do it, because I have the chance to do it. I'm blessed to have the chance to do it. Um, my company was going through probably one of its most difficult times. It was back in 2008 during the economic downturn. Our bank had called and said, "Hey, that line of credit you got, we're going to need you to just pay that off, and we're going to call it quits with you." We had paid every payment. We had been good stewards of our line of credit. Um, and I just decided, why am I doing this? You know, you studied microbiology. You could do something else. Why are you doing this? And I sat in my office, and for 6 months, I worked on something that I had nothing to do with income, growing the business. And it had to do with helping women in producing countries. And it turned out to be an incredible opportunity that paid dividends beyond I could ever imagine. And maybe real corporations can't function under these hopeful, passionate ideas and ways of thinking. But, that's the way my company has been ran. And opportunity came out of that. And it was at the moment when I had given up, pretty much saying, I'm going to do this and this and this to make everything work. I'm just going to follow my heart. And everything came together.
Now, I want to hear about those dividends, but I also want to check with you. I know that you've got other things happening this morning. So this afternoon in your time. How are we going for time?
I'm fine.
You're good?
I'm doing
Great.
fine.
So when you talk about dividends with regards to female producers, tell me what some of those dividends are. How has the work that you've done with them changed the way they either do business or changed their lives? That's so fascinating to me.
Well, when I think sometimes when we think about success, we obviously think about the financial part of it. And I can remember going to my bank early on, and I may have said this in something I wrote. I wrote on the back of a deposit slip, if you bless me with it, I will tell them about you. It was like a creed, a pat or something, a promise. And I could have said at the time, maybe it wasn't money, but I wrote it on the back of a bank deposit slip. So, you would think it's probably, I was speaking of money. But the it has been a voice. The it has been opportunity and respect. In that moment when I spent 6 months just working on trying to identify what I needed to do, not attached to money, not attached to anything other than, like you say, who am I serving? When I was in that moment, I ended up taking on an opportunity to work with the UN International Trade Center through the International Women's Coffee Alliance and helping to do what I had tried to do in my business, which is buy coffee from women in different African countries, but having a budget to do it on a global scale from a development standpoint, from a different angle. So to do it from a business angle is one thing, but to do it from, and had someone said, well, maybe what you should be doing is running a program to empower women in East Africa, I would have said, what? But I ended up doing that while running the business. So that happened.
So that wasn't an initial intention? Like that wasn't...
No, my intention was to continue to run my company. It wasn't until there was, the bank was like, you're not going to get any of our money anymore, that I said, okay, I got to find what drives me. What drives me beyond money? And it was in that moment. And from that moment when I started to do this work, this opportunity found me. There was a Harvard business case study written about the work. It was taught at Oxford. It was taught at Harvard. You talk about the dividends. I went to Harvard when it was taught at the business school. Harvard has like 5% of its antagonists and case studies are women. So I was one of very few women in a Harvard business school case study. I gained an opportunity to speak at the World Trade Organization to individuals who make trade policies globally, who had never, you talk about yourself, owning a coffee company and never been to a coffee producing country. But here I'm sitting at the World Trade Center in Geneva with executives of the WTO, and they never even seen coffee on a farm or, and these are things that they help to make global policies on.
Wow.
So, so when I said, bless me with it, the it
Is
wasn't
all of that.
necessary. Yeah, the it was the
The
microphone.
magnificence, the magnificence of being able to walk that path.
Yeah.
Because it is a magnificent path. Like, I don't know anybody who's done what you've done, Phyllis.
Well, I'm honored you say that. I'm almost kind of embarrassed because I don't know, I'm embarrassed, but oftentimes when I'm asked to do something, I always question it. And recently I had a moment of truth with myself. One situation not long ago, I was asked to speak at the African Fine Coffees Association conference. And I remember going to their
In what
first
country?
one. It was in Kigali, Rwanda, just this year. And I remember going to their conference, the first one back in like 2004 was their first conference. And, being a speaker there, it just, they didn't ask me because I buy 60 billion pounds of coffee every year from Africa. Um,
Well, so you buy 50 then.
right, right. Um,
50
but
billion pounds.
it was humbling to me because I know the types of speakers they've had in the past.
Yeah.
And they are usually pretty big stakeholders in the country. And my stakeholding is with my heart. It's not with my pocketbook.
It's
So
your intention as well, Phyllis. Like, it's so obvious what your intention is.
yeah, I guess I was really humbled by that opportunity. And when I was asked to recently speak at the World Coffee Producers Forum in Brazil, and one of the things I always talk about, and I always say with Brazil is, where are the Afro-Brazilians? If my history serves me right, it was the West Africans that were taken to Brazil to start the production of coffee so that it would become an exportable item, and during the 1700s put them on top of the world's largest exports of coffee, which they remain today. Brazil remains today. And they do that through mechanization and through, millions of smallholder farmers. And it's a beautiful country. I've had the pleasure of going there many times. But my question to my Brazilian friends, it has been, where are the Afro-Brazilians in coffee? Where are they? And it was through the women that I finally got an answer to that question. And for the most part, they are kind of where they started, without the enslavement, but definitely without the ownership, without the land ownership.
So they're picking rather than owning?
Yes, yes. And so if you take my life in cotton through generations of being workers, being started out, being the labor in the cotton fields of America, my counterparts were the laborers in the cotton and sugar coffee farms in Latin America. So there's this kindred there that that we share. And I think that being able for someone like me to be able to take that message to Africa, and for Africa to say to me, well, we never even thought about West Africans being taken to Brazil to start the industry. And I'm thinking, well, that's really interesting. So
it's that ignorance that's just so bliss, isn't it?
yeah, but I don't blame anyone for it, because when you get into a business, you start working for a big company or you start your own company, you don't necessarily have the chance to understand everything there is to
No.
know. And then to understand certain parts of it, you really have to piece together things throughout time. It's not just
Oh,
one
yeah.
place where you're like, okay, here I am. I'm a Black woman. I'm working coffee. I want to find out, how am I connected to coffee? Because everything I see in coffee in the country in which I live, it's not a whole lot of Blackness to it. Yeah, Ethiopia is
Right.
the birthplace of coffee, but beyond that, what? Where do I pull my sense of pride, my sense of ownership, my sense of it's okay for you to actually be here?
Yeah.
Um, where do I find that? And I think that that's important for anyone when they decide to do something. They have to find themselves in it. Where do I find my space in this? And is there a history for me to use as something to draw strength from in order to move forward? So I think when we first started, we were talking about the dividends on giving, and I've reaped I incredible benefits from the work that I've done, that I've given of my time. Um, Sometimes when you
Rightfully
have to
so.
get, uh, yeah, rightfully so, but I don't know that everyone does.
You're right.
Hard work can go unnoticed. I don't know if you know this. It often
Oh,
does. Um,
absolutely. Take it from me, who's offering a free podcast right now.
yeah,
I, right.
yeah.
But, my years of not getting a return on investment have come to an end. I'm building something new. I
Good.
want to go back to what you were saying about that. Women, it's not women, lots of people
Hmm.
put in the hard work and go unnoticed. And I want to connect that with what you were saying just before that is we don't necessarily as business owners have the bandwidth to consider or bring into our field of view everything that we should know, right? Like the bandwidth is eaten up very quickly when you're a new business owner, especially of a startup, learning how to do everything for yourself. It's, trust me, anyone who hasn't done it, you think it's hard, and Phyllis, you'll be able to back me up on this. You have no fucking idea, right?
No, no.
If anyone had have told me this many years in that it would have been this hard to get here, I probably wouldn't have done it. And so many of the entrepreneurs and business owners that come on this show say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's you and look, when we teach workshops to cafe owners or potential cafe owners and roastery owners and things like that, I say all the time, owning a business is going to teach you everything you never wanted to know about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone who's done it always nods their head and agrees. You should do it anyway if you've got the capability
Yeah.
of using business as a mechanism to discover yourself. It is the most worthwhile thing you will ever do for yourself.
Yes. Yes.
I
Totally
wouldn't
agree.
trade it for anything.
Totally
I'm glad
agree.
nobody told me how hard it was going to be.
No.
I'm really glad because
Oh.
I'm so proud of the woman that I am this far into it. And I'm so excited to meet the woman I'm going to be in 10 years. But
yeah.
that's only having gone through the clusterfuck that came before this. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh. I know. I know. I don't, I think I was telling my husband not long ago, I don't know if I would have, you know how you can tell me you want to sell, I don't know, quarter legs off of frogs or something. And I'd be like, oh, that's great. And I said, I don't know that I'm that person anymore. And I don't think I can encourage people to go through what no. And then,
Yeah.
but when I think about it, I wouldn't have it any other way. And it is the hardest thing you can do, but you will never know yourself more. There's nothing that's going to teach you. I remember sitting in my office, 15, 20 years ago, realizing that I hated to make decisions. And I'm like, how can you hate to make decisions and you're a
And be
business
in
owner?
business.
You have to make decisions every day. And I'm thinking, I'm like not trying to make this decision right now. So,
How can I procrastinate? How can I avoid it?
yeah,
What other thing can I do to just not have to think about this today? Yep, I
yeah.
know.
I also
Yeah.
realized that I was the person when I, go interface with my children and they were out of control. I couldn't control their lives. I have two great children that grew up. They're good people. But small children are hard to manage. And when I turned back to the business, I could do that. And so
Yep.
I'm like, I'm having a lot more fun doing this than that
Yep.
because this will do the business will do in a way it minds me better than the children. It
Yep.
obeys me better than the children. So yeah, you learn so much about yourself and you learn your values. You learn and you're put in a situation where your values will be questioned. And that's a great thing. That's a great thing.
It's a wonderful mirror, isn't it? It
It
holds a
is.
mirror up to you and it's like, really? So you want to talk about what your life currencies are? Okay, so
Hmm.
connectedness is a life currency, Lee. Okay, so where's all the connectedness? Why are you spending so much time hibernating?
Yeah,
And it's like, fuck. Now I'm
yeah.
accountable to my own words. Like, this is why I didn't want to have children. I didn't want this responsibility. They can't throw this shit back in my face, but my business does it anyway.
I know. Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You should have thought that one through. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I consider my businesses like my children.
It is.
Both of them. Both hold me accountable. They both keep me up at night. They
Yeah.
both bring me great joy and satisfaction. I just know that I'm not someone that is meant to clean up vomit and change nappies.
Yeah.
I know that will frustrate me, and I decided that I would do humanity a favor and not bring more children into the world and end up resenting. It's not for me. And people keep saying, when are you going to have babies? I'm like, I'm really excited about my ovaries drying up and me not being able to do that so that you'll all stop asking me. It's what I realized I'm not that human that should be
Yeah.
having babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a mother to many. Like I'm that person that even then when I'm going through my own existential crises, I'm the person that people come to and say, fix me,
Yeah. Yeah.
help me, show me. Like that puts me in a position of coming from my maternal place. I mentor a lot of people.
Yes.
You know, this is the way I am serviced through my maternal channels.
And you are totally fine in doing that. That is your decision.
Yeah, it's wonderful when you come across people who can see that, and then other people who are like, but no, you should have babies, you'd make a great mother. Well, hi, by the way, it's my life and it's my decision and this is what I've decided to do. I don't want to have babies. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure
I get
how
it.
and why you care, but
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
but going back to what we were talking about, I was trying to link up a few things there. I was trying to link up the idea that, you know, when you're a business owner, you start to see the world around you that you previously engaged in. So if you were an employee, you start to, so as a business owner, you start to see how different you would be if now an employee, having seen it from the other side. You
Right.
start to see the supply chain. Now that you have a business, you start to see that given that you are a supplier to some people, what it feels like for your suppliers. I am seeing these movements happen in the coffee industry where we as women in business, and I'm sure that this happens for the men in business, but being women in business, I see that we don't always reap the rewards of the things that we sow.
That's true.
And yet on the other side of that, we have a workforce that's starting to claim that they deserve so much for so little effort. And they're hiding behind the idea of a part of their identity that they don't even get to claim they didn't create. They were born into that identity.
Mm-hmm.
And they are using that identity as a shield for why they are owed something.
Mm. Okay.
And I find it a really interesting time in the history of our industry, because when people are saying, I deserve an opportunity because I'm a person of color, that offends me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I deserve a position because I'm a woman, that offends me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I deserve a position because I'm queer. I deserve a position because I'm X, Y, and Z. I want people to deserve positions because they deserve the position.
Yeah.
And they're prepared to work hard for it, despite the challenges that might face them. Are the challenges fair? Fuck no. Women like you and I know that better than anybody. But it hasn't stopped us from living these extraordinary lives. If anything, we've become more accomplished because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think we have to ensure that there aren't barriers that keep people from participating in whatever they want to do. But I truly agree with, no one deserves a position just because of their race, gender. No one, it's not going to work unless you do bring something to it. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of barriers that may exist in different settings, different situations. But yeah, I agree with that. It doesn't feel good to be there because of...
You're the token black woman on the board.
Yeah.
That's shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's condescending and it's patronizing.
But I'm kind of at a point to where I don't really care if people think that. I've learned at an early age that it's so important to know who you are and not to let others determine that. And so people have always thought that I was something else, or they thought I was the help when I was actually there leading the meeting.
That must.
So,
wow.
You can't. If they think I'm the token black person in that room, because I'm there to get all I can, and I'm there to give something. But I'm not really there to prove anything, because that's a whole different thing.
That's exhausting.
Yes. Yeah. I'm the person, if I'm on your board, I'm going to read the board book.
Yeah.
If I'm taking a course, I'm going to read all the case studies, and I'm going to raise my hand. And I think that sometimes, because we're underestimated, people who wear certain thing, because sometimes you say, well, maybe it was what I had on that made them think that I was the luggage carrier at the hotel instead of we were there for, I don't know, maybe it was what I had on, but it's not, it's what I can't pull off that makes them think that I'm that, and that's in their own head, and that's okay.
Help me understand that.
Well,
it's what I can't pull off.
It's what I can't take off. It's me. It's who I am.
Okay.
It's not my physical attire, my dress, my scarf.
It's your skin
my
color.
pants. It's my skin color. It's my gender. It's who I am as a person that causes people to sometimes, and myself even, to categorize other people. I remember early on, I'm always talking about being on one side of this, but I remember early in my coffee career visiting a customer, and there was an Asian guy who worked there. And every time I talked to him, I'd say, "When are you going to go and start your own company?" And he just kind of look at me, and I say, "When are you going to, you just don't fit here," you know? And I started to question myself. Why do I want him to start his own company? Well, you go talk to people all day. You're not telling them. Why do you think he should start his own company? So we all carry this, and it's very deep. It's very deeply rooted. So as much as I can say that I've been on one side of it, I've also dished it out in a way. So we're not immune to having our biases and seeing people only doing certain things. But the one thing that I will say is being underestimated isn't a bad thing. It can be, and it can be exhausting, and you want to be further along.
But use it.
Use it.
Yes.
Use it.
I've fallen into the trap for years of being a victim to being underestimated. And now I'm like, I'm going to take that fucking energy and I'm going to fly with it.
Oh, yeah. When I was on the board for the SCA, I was chairing what's now known, I think, the Sustainability Council or something. And they just picked me to do that. I was on the board, and they said, "Well, every board member has to chair a committee, and we want you to do sustainability." And I'm thinking, why? Why would you pick me? Of course, I do care about sustainability, but there's technical, there's all this other stuff I could do. And I'm reading the book, and it says one thing, the bylaws, it says one thing, all the meetings must be led via Robert's Rules of Order. And I'm thinking, okay, so I kind of know about Robert's Rules of Order, but I'm not sure. I go out, I buy a book, I run into this person who happens to be like a certified teacher on Robert's Rules of Order. This woman sits down with me, she goes over the stuff, and I go to my first meeting, I lay it on my team. Everything is good. I sail through the next year or so, leading the group. I turn over my seat. There's a new person in charge. The first thing out of his mouth is, "We're not doing Robert's Rules of Order because I don't know how to do
them." That's a valid, not perspective.
And I thought, okay, so this guy just made a joke about something that I spent good time, money, and effort in learning how to do because I thought it was so important. And he just said, "I'm not doing it because I don't know how to do it."
But that's the problem with it. He's not doing it because it's not valid. He's not doing it because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
He's doing it because he doesn't know it.
He didn't want to do it. I would have never done that. I would have never done that. I would never have said, "Okay, I know the bylaws says this, but I'm not going to do it because I don't want to do it." I would have never done that. And you know what?
Why?
Because I don't think that I would have been given the authority to do that. I think that I think people would have been really quick to say she doesn't know what she's doing. There had not been a Black woman on that board prior to me being on that board. And there's something to being the first one to do something. You don't want to mess it up for the others.
No, there's a responsibility that comes with it. Do you think as women we tend to work the best that we can within the lines?
Yeah. And I think younger women are saying, "I'm not going to do it either. I'm not doing that. You don't do it." And I remember someone saying to me, "We got to get more women on these different coffee boards." And so what I'm thinking about doing is having training for women to serve on boards. And I said, "For what? For what? You're wasting their time." I've sat on plenty of boards with people with zero experience. This is their first time. They haven't gone through any training. So now you want to siphon women through this extra hard sort of whatever it is you're thinking about. Why at this stage in my life, I look at it and I say, why are you being over-prepared? But that's how I've lived my entire life. But I do know that I've gained something by being over-prepared. personally.
This leads me to this idea of when you have diversity in things, you bring different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just come back from us running an full day assertiveness training for the coffee industry in Australia. And as a part of that, I've walked away thinking about, do we as women have these imaginary boundaries? Because an important part of assertiveness is boundaries. Yeah. Do we have these imaginary boundaries that we believe exist, and we try and do the best that we can within them?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the natural modus operandum of the way women are taught to think. I know I've definitely, having been raised in the Arab culture, I've always, there's a section of my thinking that I've been working very hard at breaking that is all about, all right, so I know that I can operate within here and here. And you can bet that I'm going to get the job done, and I make the most, I can turn nothing into something very quickly. But in recent years, I've been kind of stepping outside of that boundary and questioning why this boundary exists. And I think that comes from wanting to lead with intention and heart, which is something that I think that female leadership or feminine leadership brings to a team. We bring compassion and empathy, a very distinct style of leadership that is embedded in compassion and empathy, that I think if you only had all female leadership, it wouldn't hold up. I also think if you have all male leadership or masculine leadership, it doesn't hold up. But I think that when you have leadership that comes from compassion and empathy, paired with leadership that comes from assertiveness and competitiveness, what a fucking dynamic duo that is.
Exactly.
Because that kind of leadership helps push you beyond the boundaries you're used to working in.
Right.
And the feminine leadership brings you into anchoring into intention and compassion and heart. And I think, and this is why I think, like, if we've got great leaders, let's look at how can we bring that leadership together to achieve extraordinary things, as opposed to just having a token female leader or a token male leader or whatever it is in that scope of things. I'd love the discussion in our industry to be more about the real qualifications that you have. What do I really bring? Okay, so there are many females who operate from masculine leadership. They're very anchored in competitiveness. They're very anchored in assertiveness. If we were to pair them with people who had feminine leadership that came from compassion and empathy, they could learn so much together and grow so much from a business perspective and a leadership perspective. Am I crazy?
Oh, no. I have to say, one of the things that changed my life was when I attended the Coffee Quality Institute Women in Leadership Training. I think it was back in 2005, 2006. They had a small grant to bring like 17 women together from Latin America and North America, women who worked in coffee and women who owned a coffee company or worked for a coffee company. And I was paired with Aida Badley, who's in El Salvador, very well known in coffee industry. And it was at that time when I realized that, I remember sitting in that room with those women, starting to realize that it's okay to have the feelings that I've had. It's okay to be human. Yes. That who I am and everything that I represent is okay in a business setting. That the way that I think, the way that I move around in my space, it's actually okay to be a woman, a strong woman with compassion, and to show a side of yourself that really is human. And yeah, and that really, it gave me permission
It's
to
not
not
weak.
second guess, right, to not second guess how I thought, or my decision making ability. It embraced everything. And I think that oftentimes when you see male leadership, strong and sometimes even abrasive to a certain degree, we think that that's the only thing that's effective, when in all honesty, sometimes that's less effective. You can go so much further with a different approach. And I wasn't sure that what I had to offer was good. But when I was in that training, it allowed us to think really deeply about life and social issues. And I would say it was probably one of the best things that could have ever happened to me as a young professional business owner. And I often think about that. I think that that's what young women need coming into the industry, or any industry. They need a space where they can truly understand that it is all of them, every bit of them, that will help them get to their success. It's not covering up a certain part to be more masculine, or to sound more masculine, or to, you know, but it's everything. And unfortunately, the world isn't ready to accept all of us sometimes, but we have to work towards getting it ready. I've been in rooms where there's very few women, and when a woman speaks up, her voice is so much lighter. It even makes me uncomfortable, thinking, "Oh my, what are the other guys thinking?" Because her voice is so, and we get so fixated on how things currently are, that we can't imagine what things are when they just get back to being normal, almost, or what feels normal to us, because that's really what's right. It's not us pretending to be something that we're not. It's us being who we are and leading from the place that we lead. And I think you said it best, um, by bringing the two together. I've worked with male dominated companies, primarily, and I can tell that they just need something. There's something that's missing there. There's some empathy. There's some, a lot of companies in our industry are family owned, small businesses. And, the men have kind of floated to the top oftentimes. And the women are, part of the workforce in some way, but not at the top level, decision making level. And you feel it. You
Oh,
feel
yeah.
the strong, not necessarily strong, but you
It's the
feel,
aggressiveness.
yeah, you feel the homogeneity in how people think, almost. And you think that's okay, because you just don't want anybody in the room going against the grain, or causing you to slow the process down, or to think a little deeper. But that's really what you need. Whenever I've had led groups of people where someone was challenging for the whole group, that's the person I actually valued the most, because she or he wasn't going to just sit there and say something just to get along. And that person is going to make you be a better person. It's going to drive you in a different direction. And you think they're driving you crazy, but they're actually giving you more tools to work with. And
And they're
yeah,
opening up the discussion. That they're anchoring the discussion in truth.
yeah,
And like nothing infuriates me more, because I'm always that person in the room
hmm,
who's, you'll see everybody dancing around and making the niceties and, placating. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, can we please get something done? And I'll be that person that kind of makes a statement.
I know. And sometimes you don't want to be that person, right?
No, because it's hard. You don't want to be the scapegoat. And
Yeah.
so I've learnt over the years when to read the room and know that if I do this, I'm going to be the scapegoat. I've eliminated that role out of my life. But I have learnt how to be that person in the room that brings it back to the adult level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that people are acting like children, it's that people are not acting like adults either. They're not willing to have the hard conversation when that's what we're there for.
It's work avoidance.
Yeah.
Work avoidance. Yeah.
And I've got no time for that bullshit.
I flew on the other side of the country for a meeting to work with a group who was discussing some challenges financially. Mm-hmm. And they did not have the person on the schedule to talk about the finances. It wasn't even on the agenda.
Wow.
And I had to be that person to say that. Yeah. And out of no disrespect, women tend to do that more often, I think, than men.
We self-sacrifice a lot.
Yeah. 20 years ago, I started an investment club and with just women. And there's this, from time to time, let's just give ourselves a hand. And I'm like, why? What about this? And what about that? And you don't always want to just see what's wrong with something, but you don't want to get so used to patting yourself on the back that you can't get real work done, because there really is a need to do real work. And if we keep avoiding it and pretending that everything is okay, we don't get anywhere. And that's what I'm afraid of.
And I guess that's where I see a lot of these groups that seem to be starting in the coffee industry about doing this for people of color and that for queer people and this for females and that for like all these minority groups. It's wonderful. It is awesome that we are raising a voice. It's not functional. That my concern is that it's long-term, not functional. We can raise awareness all we fucking want. But if we're not going to advocate for actual change and get down to the work of actually doing the shit that's going to create change, you can have all the groups in the world.
Yeah. Well, I always say for when you talk about giving women a voice, women's empowerment, all this stuff, let's just get women at the table. When we no longer have to talk about it.
Right. That's when we're done.
When it's just the way things are. It just shakes out that way. But unfortunately, we live in a society where we consider it extra work to be a bit more inclusive. So in that sense, you have groups that form, and within those groups, it's kind of like you start to create your own exclusive group because you're been neglected. So that can be challenging too. That has challenges of its own to say, well, you don't want us in your group, so we're going to create our own group, but we're not going to include any of you either.
Right.
So, but there is power in those groups. So I think we're at a phase of building. So until there's power there, because sometimes the power isn't there. It's one-off individual just trying to find their way and not having the connections they need to have strength. So once that's achieved, then to be able to thrive and exist in a larger society, in a larger community, taking advantage of all opportunities, is the right place to be. But I think we're probably at a phase where people are coming together because there's comfort in that, and there's also empowerment in that before it goes to the next phase of whatever that might look like.
I just want them to consider action. I want it to be inclusionary action.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing with a lot of these people that are starting these groups is that they're starting these groups for the sake of getting attention. But if a part of your plan isn't how am I going to actually affect change in my community for this thing that I am highly passionate about, then unfortunately, what you're doing isn't going to have resolve.
Yeah.
It's just making noise. And I don't want it to just make noise.
Yeah. Well, there are different phases to it. And I think
Right.
that, there is definitely the awareness phase. But in order to grow, you do have to have specific things behind that you have to have a plan, what you want
And
to achieve.
right.
Um, yeah, for me, I wrote this article for Roast Magazine, and my goal in writing the article and interviewing several of the folks in the article about the missing link of African Americans in the coffee industry had to do more with inspiring people to either join the industry or to get off the fence and thinking I can or can't do this, or for those who are in the industry to say, yeah, I'm here. There's room for me here.
Yep.
And so I think that we have to just continue to do that because we all win when everyone is offering some
Exactly.
perspective. I mean, I lose when I don't get the person who's sitting next to me who thinks differently, who is different.
I guess my point in that is that we can't, it's a half of it is the talking, the other half of it is the listening. And we both have to be engaged in both of those things. Whenever I'm mentoring people in these organizations, a key thing that I say to them is, how are you going to invite the other person to listen? Because if you're just talking,
No, that's a good point.
it's just fucking noise. You have to make room for the listening. You have to make space for the listening. And you have to listen too. A lot of what's going on has to do with bandwidth. People aren't deliberately being assholes a lot of the time. It's either their conditioning, their training, their lack of money, lack of understanding, lack of experience. You've got to put this thing in front of them for them to consider. Don't yell it at them. Give people an opportunity to change and usher that change for them. Help them understand the opportunities. So, for example, I am currently working in a consulting situation with this amazing male and female business owner team. And they're looking at how they're going to launch this roastery. He's used to doing business one way, she's used to doing business another way. What we're focusing on is how they can learn from each other, but teach each other. You can't have the teaching without the other person willing to do the learning. That's the hearing part of it, right?
Right.
So if you just show up wanting to school everyone on how the fuck they should be better than what they are right now, well, are they prepared to listen to you? Have you checked? Have you checked if people are listening? And I'm not talking about you, Phyllis.
Yeah,
Everyone
no, I
wants to
know.
listen to
I know.
you.
I'm just thinking. I hear exactly what you're saying. I see both sides of that. I do. I see both sides. I see the frustration coming from those who are just talking,
Right.
and I see both sides of it, and it is very difficult. But the thing that I always say is that I always want to save a seat for myself at the table. I
Yes.
don't, if I'm not in the conversation, there's no chance you'll ever get a chance to hear my perspective or to understand that there might be a different way of looking at this thing. And I might not get to learn that from you if
That's
I'm
the key
not
part.
there. So if I've offended you, even if I have rightfully offended you, we are still not together. We're still not
Right.
learning from each other. And so, yeah, I that's something that I do worry about is that we don't, because there is a way to get people to listen. There is a way and I think that if you're offering some amount of value, I remember going to a talk at the Harvard Kennedy School, and we would go to a lot of talks there. And Ta-Nehisi Coates came to speak. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's written a few books.
No.
And he's very well-thinking individual. He talks a lot about racial inequality and just a lot of interesting topics. But I noticed who came to hear him speak. You know, there were, you know, some of the most renowned professionals on campus found the time to come and sit and hear what he had to say.
Wow.
And I'm like, why are they listening to him? Because he's really saying kind of the same thing that this person is saying, but nobody's listening to him or her. And the only thing I could come up with, and I haven't fully understood it, is that he really comes with what they call receipts. He backs up what he says. He's thought about it very deeply. It's not an off the cuff sort of, he's put this together with this, and he's come to a rational way of thinking, and people listen to that. They don't always just listen to a big bag of emotion or whatever, and sometimes that's really all you have to give them.
Yep.
But sometimes you have to say, well, you know, in this book that I read, based on this sort of something over here, you have to bring the receipts, as they say.
Right.
And I think that helps. That helps me. That helps me because it gives me concrete knowledge about anytime I'm doing a presentation. I'm not going to just give you my thoughts on it. I'm actually going to give you some time that I've put in on research.
Data.
And I think that that's important. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I think we have to learn when we're trying to help educate people and bring people along. But it is a journey. It's a journey for everyone. And we can't stop talking to each other. We can't stop, you know, sharing and growing together.
Now, you said something that I promise this is the last subject I'll bring up. I could talk about many, many things with you, and I hope that you'll come back and talk with me on the podcast again.
I would love that.
Something that I've been trying to find a lot recently, because I'm somebody who, before I would like to tackle a part of the industry, and I want to show up with identifying what the problem is, and show up with some potential solutions. Whether they'll work or not, who knows? But in part of understanding why we don't have more Black people in the coffee community than we currently do have, because we have a shockingly low number of Black people in the coffee community. I came to realize that there was, I think it was Michelle Johnson who wrote an article saying that coffee isn't something that is consumed by, well, specialty coffee in particular, isn't something that's consumed by a lot of the Black community. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, in the past, I think until the 2019 National Coffee Data Trends report from the National Coffee Association, Black Americans are drinking more specialty coffee. The numbers are proving to be up. But in past, I think since 2012, they started to look at data based on ethnicity. Black Americans or Blacks in America were among the least likely ethnic group to choose coffee. So, yeah.
Do you know why?
Well, I think when I talked to a couple research companies based on what they found, it showed that we over-index on soft drinks and sugary drinks. And here, living in the South, sweet tea is the national drink, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, but I think that there's been a lot of effort focused on the Black community for sugary drinks. And so, you're just going to have a lot of that. You're going to have a lot of people, we are, you know, victims of our society and what we see and what we're told and what we have
Mm-hmm.
access to. So I think that's part of it. Um, Part of it could be some Black people may feel that there are negative health effects that come with coffee, which have proven not to be the case. Um, so I think that those, and then I think in this article I talk about the myths when I remember growing up as a child and hearing coffee's going to make you black. Getting back to the
Oh
whole thing
shit.
of
I never even
colorism.
thought about that. About like that stigma that could be attached to
Yes.
it.
Yes, I remember my mother saying, don't drink that coffee, it's going to make you black. Well, even as a Black person, being darker because of, crazy, actually, scientific data shows that colorism exists, and the darker you are, the worse off you are. And, so
Socioeconomically.
yeah, well, yeah, you just don't want to be a darker person. And it's funny I
Yeah, wow.
always loved very dark, dark skin for some reason. And it has just a negative connotation to it. The colorism, where you fit in the scale of darkness is what I'm talking about. So there's just a lot of stuff out there that's like that, but I think that that's changing, and I think that that's changing, and I believe that more Black Americans are seeing themselves a part of the industry. Um, it was nice when I ran across Michelle's article. Um, I think that it mimics, I think the coffee industry mimics society as a whole and business ownership in many different
Yep.
industries. It's not just coffee in and of itself. If I probably started an electrical company, I would find that there are a few Black people that do that. Oftentimes, companies, especially family owned businesses, you hire people you hire people who look like you. Um, and so if that isn't in your circle, then you don't ever get in, right? You don't ever get in. I've been around friends and they're saying, well, my son who's graduating from college is going to go internship at, Bob's import company up in New York. And oh, okay, well, that's how that goes. So as those
Right.
types of connections continue to happen, at what point is it like, well, what about, this person who isn't a part of this network who can come
Right.
in the door and offer something that maybe this person don't know anything about coffee, but they'll have interest and they could have an exciting career. They could, travel to different places of the world,
Yep.
connect to different types of people. There are brown and Black people growing coffee, so wouldn't be a bad idea to have those kind of people interfacing with them. So
And it's why
yeah,
we encourage networking, right? So that you could grow your network and
yeah,
become like in people's field of vision. It's
yeah,
something for any of the business owners who own cafes and are listening to this. If you want to improve business, have people who are customer facing that look like your community,
yeah,
all of your community.
yeah.
Like, and there are very few communities across America that I've seen that don't have people of color in them.
Mm,
There are communities that are predominantly white,
correct.
but there are communities that most communities have some multiculturalism in them. Others more
Exactly.
than others. But if you have people serving at your cafe that
Hmm.
have people who share the same ethnicities as your potential customers, those potential customers are going to walk in because they recognize someone that looks like them. It's going to feel like home. And so I want to encourage anyone that's listening to this. It's not hard to have diversity. It's really not hard to have diversity. Encourage it.
Yeah. It's harder. It's hard if you don't have it. It's hard. It's hard when you're trying to achieve it. I don't discount the difficulty because people have contacted me saying, how do I do this? Mm-hmm. First of all, I think you have to want to do it. And because you don't have any diversity in your cafe, you may hope to do it, but it has to be a priority for you. Because if it's a priority for you, then you're going to figure out how to do it. And part of the learning and the growing is figuring out how to do it, because you're treading ground that you've not treaded before. You're doing things that you've not done before. When I was in high school, I worked for Burger King. And not only my family started to eat at Burger King, but all my high school teachers started to eat at Burger King. And they didn't go to Burger King. And so, yeah, you're right.
So awesome.
Yeah, you had all these people now coming into Burger King. And I remember having a fight there thinking, there are no black people on the front counter. We're all in the kitchen. And then they said, oh, okay, well, Phyllis, you can come up and work the front counter. So there's always been a fight, right? But,
and there always, well, I hope there always won't be, but there will be for quite some time.
Yeah. But, I think it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife who said, Coretta Scott King says that freedom is never won in any one generation. It has to be fought in every generation. So I see this generation becoming very frustrated. Mm-hmm. It's your battle. It's your right to fight it and to get to a new place, a new space. It's tiring to keep fighting it, but the generations before you fought it. So now you have to fight it. And so I think that's good. I think it's bad that you have to fight it, but it's good that you know what it looks like and you know that you don't stand for something that's not right. And so, I would just encourage your listeners to explore opportunities to engage with people who aren't like them and to engage with people who cause them a little angst even, and an opportunity to grow.
What a wonderful place to end the podcast. Cheers to you, lady. Thank you so much for your wisdom and for what you've been doing for the industry. It is an honor to have you on the podcast, and I hope we have many, many more conversations.
I'm sure we will. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing.
It's my absolute humbled honor to be sharing space with you.
Thanks
for tuning in, everyone.
Thank you.